Our next session here at the AIDS United Public Policy Council will be focused on HIV and health policy post-midterm election. We, as a reminder for those who are joining us via Facebook Live, are a council that brings together organizations from across the U.S. to advocate for people living with or affected by HIV and organizations that care about them. We are in the midst of our meeting, and we are excited to open this session up to our friends and colleagues from around the country. Today we're featuring a guest here with us, Lanae Erickson, who is Vice President for Social Policy and Politics at Third Way, and I'd love to turn it over to her.
Thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Lanae, and I work at Third Way, which is a center-left think tank in town. I spend all of my time trying to understand voters in the middle. What are they thinking? How do we talk to them? How do we persuade them? And how do we kind of broaden the breadth of support for progressive issues, particularly things like LGBT equality, reproductive rights, immigration, lots of other things in that kind of social issues bucket. But today, I'm going to talk to you about, there was an election. I think we all know that we just had a big one. And I feel better equipped today to tell you what happened than I was last Wednesday when we did a post-election event at 8:30 in the morning the day after the election, and half the races hadn't been called yet. So now we have a little bit more information. But some of the things are still evolving. So I'm going to take you through just kind of the latest of what we know of what happened in the election, both at the federal level and a little bit at the state and local, as that obviously pertains to you all as well. And then we also are releasing today an election-y poll that we did in the 2 days before the election, trying to understand what voters were trying to tell us that turned out. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with you today, and you're getting a sneak peek because we haven't actually released it yet. It'll be out this afternoon. So you may have noticed that we had a really big election in terms of turnout. So I was just talking to somebody this morning that reminded me, this is actually the highest turnout in the midterms, basically in modern history. So people are paying attention. That's really good. I think that's really good for our issues. And everyone was talking about the fact that there was this blue wave coming. The blue wave is going to come and overtake us. And then a lot of the post-election conversation was about, did that blue wave actually come to fruition? Was it more of a blue trickle? Was it a blue tidal wave? How big was the wave? Can we surf on it? And I think the best point of comparison, now that we've had some more of these races called, is 2006. So in 2006, we did have a wave. It was, if you remember, it was during the middle of George W. Bush's second term. The Iraq War was going horribly, everything was terrible, and there was a big wave. So if you look at that compared to what we now have as of yesterday, we actually surpassed our 2006 wave in the House. We have at least 30, I think 2 more were called this morning, so we probably have at least 32 pickups in the House. Kirsten Sinema was called late last night, which is so exciting. So at most we're gonna have 2 down in the Senate, and then we'll have governorships that we've gained between 7 and 9 governorships for Dems. So I would call this a very solid blue wave. And anyone who begs to differ with me should just try to explain to me like how we wouldn't be when we got that many gains. So let's start. Everyone was talking about the House. The House is obviously huge. It's a place where a lot of bad things are going to be stopped from happening over the next couple of years, and some oversight can be done, which I think everyone's really looking forward to. But let's start with everything that's not in the House. So in the Senate, the governorships, and the state Senate and the House, Dems did a really good job. So we flipped Nevada in the Senate. We also now flipped Arizona, so that should be blue. We flipped governorships in Illinois, Kansas, Maine, Michigan, New Mexico, Nevada, and Wisconsin. There's 2 more to be flipped. We flipped the state Senates in Colorado, Maine, Minnesota, and New York, and we flipped both the state House and Senate in New Hampshire. So this is a place where Republicans had made a really big set of gains, was at the state level between 2009 and 2016, and we're really digging out of the hole the Democrats found themselves in. Republicans had, a couple of wins that they could talk about, but really all they flipped when you look at everything about the House was they were able to pick up the Senate seats in Indiana, Missouri, and North Dakota, and they were able to take the governorship from independent to Republican in Alaska and flip the state house in Alaska. So I would say, kind of looking at all of this, we knew that this was going to be a very, very tough Senate map for Democrats. There were 10 Democrats, if you recall, that had to defend their seats in states that Trump had won. 5 of them he had won by double digits. So the fact that the GOP was only able to flip a handful of those seats, I think, is actually pretty good news for Democrats, and a lot better than we thought at the beginning of the cycle. But everybody cared most about the House because that was really where we thought that we could make some gains, and we did. So we picked up 32 as of now, and counting, House seats. And the GOP only managed to flip 2. Now, I was sad about this because they're both in my beautiful home state of Minnesota. But notwithstanding, that's a pretty nice looking map. And those wins were really spread across the country. It wasn't just California. It wasn't just the Acela Beltway where we've been able to do well in the past. It was really everywhere. We saw, these folks running and winning all across these places. And a lot of these were members of the New Democrat Coalition. So they're coming in, a lot of young people, a lot of people of color, a lot of new diversity that's going to be coming in, and a lot of folks saying they're calling themselves kind of pragmatic progressives. They're like, I want to get things done for my constituents. So if you look at the remaining House districts that are left, we actually think we're going to do even better than that map that I just showed you. There are 6 of the remaining 10 where Democrats lead. All of those lean towards the Democrats depending on, based on where the votes are that are left to count. So 2 of them the AP has already called, everybody else just hasn't called yet, so we think we're gonna add there, and then there are 4 others where we think that based on where the votes are that are left to come in, we're gonna pick up those seats as well. So that's great news. That puts us to 36. And then the GOP actually leads in 4 of the remaining races, but in 3 of them, based on the remaining ballots and where they are, we actually think Democrats might pick those up too. If they do, we're gonna end up with 39 pickups in the House. And that is definitely the making of a pretty big win. Yeah, exactly. It's very exciting. The only one that's left to call that we probably won't be able to make up was in Georgia 7. But that's right next to the district that Lucy McBath just won in Georgia 6, and that was a huge pickup. We were not able to win that special election with John Ossoff, but now it's the McBath district, so that's very exciting. So we think, if I had to guess, that we're going to end up netting 39 seats, which is a really big haul and about a third more than we were actually able to do in that wave in 2006. So just to give you a sense of who these people are that are coming in, there were a couple of different groups that were kind of endorsing folks throughout the primary process and then the general election process. And there's been a lot of media coverage about kind of the movement to the left within the Democratic Party. And it's true, there have been some really big wins in some of the bluer places with people like Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but those were mostly in places that were already Democratic held, and then they moved to the left with someone who was taking out the current Democrat. Of the people that flipped races, they're mostly those kind of pragmatic progressive type folks. So the New Dem PAC, which is the PAC for the New Democratic Coalition in the House, they had an 86% win rate in the primaries, and then they had more than a 50% win rate in the general election. They flipped 27 of those districts. And they could have, after we call all of them, 32 of the 39. Then there were these other groups that endorsed folks that these are more aligned with kind of the Sanders type politics. And they actually struggled both in the primary and in the general election. So in the primary, they had about a third that their endorsed candidates won in Our Revolution and Justice Dems. And they had some wins at the end, 5 and 4 respectively, but none of them flipped a Republican district. So the folks that are in these kind of newer places that we now have to defend were kind of thinking about their red and purple district as they were running, and they weren't necessarily sounding as much like the Bernie revolution. So we do have a real revolution, though, which is that we have the most diverse House caucus that we will ever have had in history. We have 90 Democrats of color, 85 women, and 8 LGBT members of the House that are coming in. We've got a lot of historic firsts, places that have not elected people of color, women, LGBT candidates before, that really have rode in on this wave and driven this wave and excited people in a way that I think maybe some of the past candidates weren't able to do. So it's a very, very different looking kind of face of the Democratic Party than I think we had before. I will note the Republican Party has actually gotten more white male, which was really hard. Because they started at an extremely high bar for that. But I think they are down. I was just doing an event with Emily's List earlier today. I think they're down to 7% women. So a lot of the women that were in kind of these more purple districts or people of color have been actually wiped out by this wave on the Republican side, which leaves us struggling with, I think, a less diverse caucus on that side and one that is more ideologically, kind of concentrated, which is unfortunate for trying to actually get things done. So let's talk a little bit about the exit polls. Democrats obviously won in a lot of places, so who did they win? Well, they won 62% of moderates. They won 55% of independents, which independents actually lean right at this point. And there's a lot of the think about it as the, what's his name, who ran for election that nobody remembered and he didn't know where Syria was. That guy is kind of independents. It's, folks that maybe vote for a libertarian candidate. But Democrats were able to win those folks this time around. They walloped the GOP with college-educated voters, which is not surprising. They did really well in 2016 with college-educated voters too. But what is most interesting on this chart to me is that they tied with non-college voters. So last time around with non-college voters, in 2016, Democrats lost them by 7 points. And this time, they tied. That's really good news. It's also because those aren't necessarily all white college-educated voters, or non-college voters, which is what people talk a lot about, the white working class. But part of it is that non-college group that turned out looked a lot different than the non-college group that turned out in 2016. So that's a lot of people of color that are in that group. And we Democrats still lost the white working class, but when you look at non-college altogether, they were able to tie because they energized a lot of folks that maybe didn't come out to the polls in 2016. They still lost white voters, won huge among non-white voters. The other thing I'll point out in here is kind of the generation gap. So millennials actually only supported Hillary Clinton 55 to 40, which is shocking when you think about it. And here, millennials, actually 2/3 of them voted for Democrats, and they turned out 10 points higher than they have in the previous midterms. So young people were also really driving this wave, and a lot of millennials were running for office this time around that also kind of drove that energy. So let's get into this little election eve poll that I mentioned. We did a poll with David Binder Research out in California. We did it in just the House districts that were battlegrounds, because that's really where people were focused. So anything Cook Political Report had said was a lean in either direction or a toss-up. And we actually referred to the candidates by name. So we asked them about what they thought about those particular candidates, and we asked 2,500 people, which was a really big sample size. And they were either people that had already voted early, or they said, I will absolutely be voting. So one of the things we asked them was, how do you feel about the ideology of this candidate? And one of the things that they said was, most people said, I feel pretty good about where this candidate is. Only 16% said that they would want that candidate to be more liberal than in the past, and 37% said they didn't want any change. Another 21% said they would want a more moderate, or 14% more conservative. So people were pretty satisfied with the candidates they had at the ballot. And we asked them, okay, what was your deciding vote? What decided your vote in terms of issues? Healthcare, 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 over and over and over again. This was an open-ended question, and 51% of people volunteered healthcare. That was absolutely the number one driving. About 35 said immigration. Almost all of those were GOP voters. And then another, about 27% said jobs in the economy. This is very unusual. Jobs in the economy are always at the top, right? People will just be like, jobs, 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 jobs. But this time it was healthcare, 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 healthcare. And the Democratic candidates actually were really talking about that too. One of the things we asked in the poll was, what did you hear your named candidate talking about? So it was, what did you hear Abby Stamberger talking about? What did you hear that specific person? And that was also open-ended. We put it into a big word cloud. And all across it just said healthcare. And usually Democrats are very bad at being on message, so I was really glad to see this time. They had their script and they were sticking to it. So then we asked them, what are your priorities for the next Congress? What should they be working on? And the number one answer there was reducing healthcare costs. That's really kind of what people were focused on, was the cost of their healthcare. Also expanding access to healthcare was very, very high on that list. Fixing the immigration system, and again, if you say it that way, you got folks from both parties saying we need to fix the immigration system and creating good paying jobs. So these are the things that folks want Congress to focus on over the next couple of years. And you could see in some of the ads how these candidates were talking about healthcare and really using this to their advantage, talking about healthcare access and affordability of healthcare. So I think this is hooked up to work, and we'll see. Nope, just kidding. All right, well, that's a very nice ad. It's talking about how much he loves healthcare. So one of the questions we then dug in on, though, was what did they mean when they were talking about support for healthcare? Healthcare is a very broad topic. We said, what is the message you're trying to send with your vote on healthcare? And 20%, so 1 in 5, said that the message they were trying to send was support Medicare for all or single payer. But the bulk said that they wanted, the message they were trying to send was either protect pre-existing conditions or reduce the cost of healthcare. So 54% said one of those two things. We then, though, dug in a little bit on Medicare for all because it was a big topic of conversation. In fact, we did a project where we watched the 967 ads, my poor intern, that Democrats or their affiliated groups ran in all these districts since Labor Day. And what we found was that Democrats were not talking about single payer, Republicans were attacking them on single payer, and it ended up being the number one attack that Republicans used towards the end. They started on sanctuary cities and they kind of moved over to single payer towards the end. So in almost every one of these districts, they were running anti-single payer ads, even for people that hadn't supported it in the first place. So when you asked about Medicare for all, about 51% said that they supported Medicare for all in the poll. And again, these are folks in battleground districts. So it was a pretty red battleground. That's a pretty high number. We also then asked about a little bit more context. We asked about if it meant that we had to increase taxes. It gave them numbers about the overall cost, and then said that it would end employer-covered health care because these are the three hits that Republicans were using on Medicare for all. And you could see all of a sudden that support just evaporated. So there was a reason that Republicans were running these ads, was that these attacks were actually super, super effective. And once you gave people, one line on what the Republicans were saying about single payer, it would just dissipate immediately. So what they really did like, though, was improving the ACA. This is kind of crazy when you think about it. In 2010, in my post-election analysis, the ACA could not have been more politically poisonous, right? I mean, we brought us all these crazy Tea Partiers in on this wave. But now, people love it. They're so here for it. And when you put it head-to-head with, this was head-to-head with repeal the ACA, protect and improve the ACA, or move to Medicare for all, and overall, improving the ACA wins substantially over either of those other two options. So people are really now feeling very good about where we are with Obamacare. So I think now everybody's going to ask, like, what does this mean for 2020? Because I have a spreadsheet of 35 potential candidates that think that they're running for president as a Democrat, and that race is about to start off in rapid fashion in the next couple of weeks. So we asked some questions of these same battleground House voters about what they were sending in terms of a message around 2020 and what they wanted to see. And I will start by saying only 37% of the people in these battlegrounds said that they would definitely vote for Donald Trump. Now, this is against a generic Democrat, and we can't actually run generic Democrat, which is we might want to. Just put a D there. But that means even in these kind of pretty red districts, his base is there for sure, but there's a lot of folks that are rethinking. I like to call them the Trump triers. They might have thought, hey, I don't really like Hillary, maybe this is good for a change, and now they're like, what is happening? So there were 52% that said that they would vote against Donald Trump. Now, between now and then, it's like an eon in politics. I have no idea what's going to happen, and we've been able to mess this up before, so I'm sure we can do that again, but let's try not to, and we're starting in an okay place. Because if we can win in these places, we can definitely win in the Electoral College. So we then asked just the Democrats and independents, what are the things you're looking for in 2020? Because I don't really care what the Republicans are looking for in 2020, they have their candidate already. But for Democrats and independents, we said, would you prefer somebody who has a lot of government experience, or would you prefer somebody who has a fresh perspective? Fresh perspective won out there, and usually Democrats actually really like experience. So I used to say I was like a Hermione voter. I was like, who is studying the most? That's who I would vote for, and now I'm like, I don't care. You can hire someone who studied. But people really are looking for, a fresh perspective, a fresh voice, somebody new coming to the table. And I think we saw that with a lot of these candidates that people were excited about, from Stacey Abrams to Abby Spanberger and everywhere in between. We also asked them, do you want somebody who's going to work across party lines to get something done, or do you want somebody who's going to be uncompromising in pursuing their policy goals? And even though compromise is a dirty word in DC, it's always very popular everywhere else. So 88% say I want people who will work across the party lines in order to get something done. We asked them about what they thought people should focus on in terms of the economy. And there's a lot of discussion within DC about kind of reducing income inequality. But what they really focused on was, can we have somebody who will expand opportunity? And we've seen this, we did 12 trips to battleground districts where we stayed for 2 weeks apiece in the last year to just talk to people on the ground about what they wanted. And I realized at that time no one was saying income inequality because no one actually lives by the really, really rich person, right? So in an urban area you see it, but where I'm from in northern Minnesota, the rich person was like the pediatrician, and they had an outdoor pool. It was like a really nice pool, but it wasn't the same kind of staggering inequality that you see when you're in an urban area. The only place we heard people talk about income inequality was actually in Miami. And it was, you're standing there looking at Little Haiti next to Star Island and Madonna's house, and you see really where it's in your face. In a lot of other places, people aren't as focused on that divergence. They're more focused on how do we expand opportunity for every single person in every place in America. And then we also asked people, just do you want somebody who calls themselves a democratic socialist, or would you prefer somebody who, like Elizabeth Warren just said this phrase, mend, not end capitalism? And that's where people mostly were, was saying, okay, capitalism is okay, but we have to do some things to fix it. And again, this is with Democrats and independents, so there aren't even Republicans in this mix. We also ask this question, we often say Democratic primary voters vote like pundits because they really want to pick the person who's going to win. And that was absolutely true this time. We said, would you rather pick somebody in 2020 who mirrors your policy preferences, or would you rather pick somebody who can beat Trump? People want to beat this guy, not surprisingly. So I think that's definitely going to be a big focus of the conversation. There's lots of ideas about how you beat him, right? But I think that everybody's going to be trying to beat a candidate that can say they can beat Trump. And then finally, we asked people to win elections. Do you think the Democratic Party should move to the left to energize and excite liberals and progressives? Or do you think they should appeal to a broad range of voters, including maybe some of those who voted for Donald Trump? And 70% say the latter. They say we really need to have a broad coalition because, again, we're really focused on getting this guy out of office. So that's kind of how these folks were thinking about that. And I have to say, I remember after the 2014 election, I did a lot of post-election analysis, and it was very depressing. And one of the things that we found was that a third of the voters we thought would be Democratic the day before the election didn't know there was an election. They knew there was an election this time. And it was really helpful, and we had a very, very energetic set of candidates who came out and decided that they were going to run, many of them for the first time, and they energized a lot of people that had never paid attention to midterms before. So hopefully we can keep that going and keep this blue wave riding so that we can ride it right into 2020. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Really appreciated all the good insights in there. I guess I'm left with a question after seeing this and kind of digesting everything. The new Dem PAC, which is moderate, centrist, pro-development, pro-business, it's the Clinton Democratic sort of wing of the party, is the one that did well in this, flipped 27 seats, which the Bernie folks and the other didn't flip any. And then you showed that Dem primary voters want a are approaching this very punishing and pragmatically.
Yeah.
They want to win. They don't really necessarily care who. Meanwhile, we're at a point where Gen X, millennials, and the next wave of voters are very much left of center and left of that. So we elected 36 new Democrats who don't necessarily, so it seems like there's this kind of logical inconsistency amongst Democratic voters in this election. And I guess my question is that read accurate? And two, in your crystal ball, when does that come home to roost for us and create problems down the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely comes home to roost when the 35 people are fighting it out for who needs to be the nominee. But I do think there is a tension there. But I think there have been a bunch of candidates that have been able to kind of unite both of those constituencies, both the more suburban, maybe college-educated women who have been turned off by Trump, and and win more non-college voters, and really energize young people. And it's been about authenticity, really having a personal story to tell and just being really truly who they are. B, about having a really diverse candidate pool. I mean, Stacey Abrams was hit during her primary for being too moderate, actually. Right. And the other Stacey, because the person who was running against her was also named Stacey, actually tried to run as a lefty. And so you have somebody who, sounds like a new voice and who is representing a community that hasn't felt represented. I think that goes a long way towards energizing people. And I saw these some of these House candidates that I worked with really closely, and they had volunteers coming out the wazoo, and so they weren't necessarily being kind of Clinton-esque, like I need to be very quiet and careful and not not say anything that might hurt anyone's feelings. They were basically just having an openness to I want to get things done and I want to work with everybody. And there's a Dean Phillips who beat Eric Paulson in my lovely home state of Minnesota, said this is a conversation and everyone's invited to the conversation. And I want them all to be here. And so it was more an openness than necessarily a centrism that I think that was showing. So it wasn't like saying, oh, every single person who voted for Donald Trump, like, F you, and you're not invited back. But more saying, like, I'll work with anyone who wants to work with me, and here's what I believe. The other component was the no corporate PAC pledge took off like crazy this cycle. And we had hundreds of candidates taking a no corporate PAC pledge. That's literally never happened before. And that, I think, really energized people because they were saying, all right, well, this person isn't bought and sold. And that actually is really powerful, I think, for young people, for voters that maybe haven't voted all the time, for people that are non-college. Like, it really brings together a nice coalition of people that all feel they haven't been particularly well represented by folks who are taking a lot of corporate PAC money. So I think there are some ways to weave that together, and saw a bunch of candidates do that. So I'm hopeful that we can find some in 2020 that can do that as well.
Thank you.
Daphne.
Thanks for that. It was really super interesting. So we're from Ohio. Yeah, it didn't feel like a blue wave inside Ohio. It's really disappointing, and frankly, going into the election, everyone, including, turns out now we know after sort of this post-election conference where all of the statewide Republicans who were elected themselves said they didn't expect to be elected. So going into the election, there was a lot of chatter about a landslide in Ohio. Not one statewide Democrat was elected. We did pick up a few state house seats, but only like 3, I think. So we still have a really conservative legislature, both houses, still a conservative governor. Our incumbent senator was reelected handily, which is great. So it doesn't. I guess the question is, what's happening in a state like Ohio? Is it that gerrymandering has sort of, can be overcome in certain districts, but not in others? Or, does this mean that Ohio truly isn't a bellwether anymore? We're really moving solidly, Republican. Can you opine on that?
There are a lot of folks that are talking about, do we actually count Ohio as a swing state in 2020 for the presidential? Because it was a very red wave in Ohio, other than Sherrod Brown, I think. And it was really tough. One of my best friends works for Sherrod Brown, and I just was talking to him this weekend about how did your boss win and everyone else lost. And when you look at the numbers, Sherrod Brown was able to do much, much better in rural and exurban areas, and nobody else did. And when you compare with, how he did compared to Cordray, it just they did the same in the suburbs and in urban areas, and they did wildly different everywhere else. So I think that's a difficult nut for Democrats to crack. A lot of what we saw in those pickups were in those more suburban places. And some of the Senate Democrats that we lost, who I love dearly, are the ones that represent those more rural areas. So I think we have to figure out how to have something on offer for people that don't live in the cities, and that I think is a continual struggle, and it's going to be a struggle, but it's much harder to put together a winning coalition at the presidential level without winning anywhere but cities, because you gotta have the number of electoral votes, and there are not enough urban voters for that. So I think that is probably the biggest challenge going forward. I do think there are some folks that won in those places that did a great job, and they really focused on what can I provide you with your life. So it was really a lot of talk about healthcare costs, a lot of talk about the tax bill and how it wasn't good for them, a lot of talk about infrastructure. If you look at Danica Rome, who just won in Virginia, was the first transgender state legislator elected last year in the special, or in the Virginia off-year elections, only talked about roads the whole time. She was like, Route 29, Route 29, Route 29, over and over and over again. And I think that we have to do some more thinking about how, what do those folks need? There's obviously a lot of things that Democrats can offer them, but clearly we haven't articulated it well enough.
Got Carolyn, then Lauren, Matthew, and Peter.
Thank you so much for, I'm over here. I know, I wonder if you have any, thoughts about the Senate in 2020 and kind of what that's looking like and whether we have a shot.
Yeah. Great question. I was just mapping that out with someone this morning, and one of the difficult things is a lot of the candidates we might recruit think that they're running for president. So we were mapping out like who's up, and we're like, oh, that person would be good there, that person would be good there, and we had a list of like 10, and I was like, all of those Democrats think they're running for president, they're not running for Senate. So I think that's gonna be part of the problem, is like, okay, we might be able to win Montana if somebody like Steve Bullock ran for, ran against Daines, but is he gonna run for Senate? I think he's gonna run for president. So I think there's a little bit of a recruitment challenge that we have, but the Republicans do have, a worse map for them next time around. This is their class of 2014, so they wanted some places that they probably shouldn't have, and that they're a little overstretched, so maybe we can come back for those folks, but it's gonna be tough. I mean, the Senate is, just such as it is, like if you added up just the Senate seats that are in places that went to Trump by a lot, and have voted Republican every single statewide in recent memory, they're at 46 seats already with solid red states, just because of the way that the Senate is set up. And Democrats have a handful over 30 if you add up the solid blue states. So it's always going to be a harder map, I think, unless and until we change the structure of the Senate and don't overrepresent our rural areas. But we do have a much better map next time than we did this time. And I actually am really happy, even though the Senate numbers don't look great overall, I'm happy that Democrats were actually able to win races in a lot of those what we call blue wall states last time around, because there was this whole discussion after 2016, like, are Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania like gone forever? And the answer is no. They came back to Democrats this time around. We were able to defeat Scott Walker. Tammy Baldwin won pretty handily. Gretchen Whitmer won governorship in Michigan, and Stabenow was reelected pretty handily. Minnesota has a pretty big blue wave other than those two districts. So I do think there's a blueprint for how to win in the Midwest there, which is helpful and can probably help in 2020 for the Senate too.
I want to go back to your point about millennials,
Yes.
And that 10 points higher. I would guess that we have 2 more years of millennials registering to vote. So 2 questions. One, what's the prediction for 2020 of how many more millennials will be turning out to vote? And then also how effective the March for Our Lives campaign was and that type of organizing among millennials.
I will say I was on a panel for USA Today a week ago on the youth vote, and I was like, this is the last time I'm ever going to be asked to be on a panel about the youth vote. It's like I'm already really on the cusp of like vintage millennial. I can still hang, but the people on the panel with me were all like 18, and they're not millennials anymore. They're now like whatever's going to come after that. So the millennials are fully aged into the population, and if you'd like to hear what a mid-30s divorcee has to say about something, but no more youth panels for me because I felt like a grandmother. But what they all were talking about was guns. Everybody was talking about guns. So I do think there was a real energy around that. And I know the Parkland folks were frustrated with the results in Florida in a number of different ways. I gotta tell you, Rick Scott, if he is sworn into the Senate, he can thank the fact that he distanced himself from the NRA. It really changed gun politics, that now we've got somebody who signed gun safety legislation as a Republican now winning and coming to the Senate. That kind of shakes things up a little bit, and I'm hopeful that that means the NRA's grip is loosening just a little bit. I'll also say on the kind of point about the new Dems, these new Dems, they are not NRA new Dems. There is not a single one of those seats that got flipped by somebody who is endorsed by the NRA. They are all coming in saying, I support gun safety legislation. So that's hopeful. I do think it energized a lot of young people. And a lot of young people just hate Donald Trump. He is a really, really good advertiser. So the last midterm election, the youth vote was 21%, and they turned out at 21%. This time it was 31%. So there's a lot of room to keep growing that. but that's the highest in recorded, in recent history. And so I think we're headed in the right direction, and a lot of it had to do with, feeling unsafe in their schools and feeling like they really just needed an end to gun violence.
Matthew.
Thank you so much for this presentation. So with probably the new balance of the Supreme Court, and with that John Roberts was pretty widely expected to be the swing justice, has a very notorious history of opposition to voting rights, in particular the VRA, and Congress piece would probably will not effectively address restoring the VRA for at least another Voting Rights Act for another 2 years. Probably a lot of those efforts to expand voting rights and access to ballot box are going to be state level. And you talked a bit about some of the wins for progressive candidates for governorships and flipping the governorships. I think there are also a lot of wins for down ballot for attorney generals and secretary of states too. And there are a lot of really great ballot initiatives around redistricting and restoring the right for folks who have felony convictions. I just wondered if you could share a bit more about some of those down ballot and ballot initiative wins and how that might impact expanding access voting in future elections.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest wins on Tuesday night was Amendment 4 in Florida. I mean, amazing. And in a time when, yeah, huge. In a time when we're having recounts on literally everything else, they're like, oh no, we're all good here. Like, that's astounding.
There's always like white phones wanting to
Bring them on. I'm here for it. All of the returning citizens can vote. I'm in for it. But I mean, that's going to restore the vote to over 1 million voters just in Florida. And I think it also showed the broad support across the ideological spectrum for, restoring people's right to vote. They're giving people their constitutional rights. And so that's really good. It also means, like, Terry McAuliffe did a bunch of voting restoration in Virginia, and he didn't get kind of attacked for it from the right. So I do think there is kind of this groundswell of pro-little d democracy that's happening. And so we saw initiatives pass on automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, citizen redistricting, so anti-gerrymandering, and a number of others. I think there were about 5 or 6 that passed. In addition to the really, really big win in Florida. So there's definitely a movement afoot there. But, we also saw a lot of bad things happen in this election, and, governors who were about to be sworn in as governor, who were the Secretary of State counting their own ballots and losing a bunch of, votes from heavily people of color districts and things like that. So it's a struggle, and we're currently trying to count ballots in Broward County, and I feel like I'm watching recount too, and I don't really want to do that. But so there's a lot of hijinks that you can still do at the local level, which is worrisome. And I think we just need to keep our eye on the ball, because I don't think that there's going to be a new VRA anytime soon.
Hi. You touched briefly on the anti-gerrymandering initiatives. I think there were 4 that passed this year. So I'm just sort of curious, what's your guess for what happens to the House in 2020 with those initiatives? Also, sort of the historical perspective of, we just came off this midterm election where the party out of power took 50% more seats. What happened during the presidential cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the latter point, it's worrisome. It's always like, okay, we have a wave, and then we're like, now we have to defend this ground we've waved to, right? And if you look at some of these districts, we won a seat in Oklahoma City. Really? It wasn't even on the red to blue list. It was and the red to blue list was 92 districts. It was really big, and the DCCC didn't even think, hey, this is what we should put on. And then we're like, wait, we won where? We're trying to look at our list. We're like, that's not even on our list. Okay, great. So there's some tough places now that we have to defend next time around. However, if you look at the chart of how Democrats have done over the last 15 years, it goes presidential, midterms, because our voters come out for presidential, they do not for midterms. And so, so I think like it's great that we're having to defend that ground in a presidential year. It is going to set us up better to defend most of it. And man, these candidates are really good. They're really, really good, the folks that I was working with. So I'm hopeful that we can maintain where we are in the House. I think it's going to be hard to expand from where we are in the House. Even there might be a few of these places where we can get from gerrymandering. So the Brennan Center says that Democrats would pick up somewhere between 8 to 12 seats if the districts were districted around the country. That's a lot, right? So in a couple of these places, they will be able to, you know, to deal with that. But a lot of the places are like North Carolina, you know, are in Republican hands, and that's why they're so badly districted. So, so I'm hopeful in a few of those places, but I don't think we're going to see a huge sea change. Where we will see a huge sea change is the after 2020, with obviously the census and you know, and then major kind of reapportionment there. And so it's really, really important that we win all those statewide races in 2020, as well as getting the crazy person out of the White House, so that we can make sure we're you know, addressing that problem.
Great. Next I have Henry, then Suraj, Kathy, Paul, Mike Gifford, and then Lindsay.
I'm from the great state of Mississippi, of course. You mentioned earlier about cultural changes as far as trends with the Democratic Party. As of recent, we talked about the younger progressive voters. As of recent, Pelosi's press conference, where they asked her, you know, are you the incoming Speaker of the House? And she said, most definitely. So historically, those individuals who didn't see the power of know how to count votes and project, you know, what the outcomes would be. What are some of the additional comments as far as building up those younger candidates so that we have sustainable leadership in the party long term is what I would like to hear some of your comments on that. And most recently, this season it's been a culture of emboldenment where a lot of candidates have felt emboldened by President Trump. I.e. speaking of the situation with our senator from great state of Mississippi and her recent comments, and how privilege plays a pivotal role in how society views a candidate, and even in 2018, how they can sway the vote. So what are some of your projections and comments on those two things?
Yeah, one of the really good news stories coming out of the election, I think, is all of the people of color that won in districts that are very heavily white. And people haven't really been talking about that, and I think in the past, you know, if a person of color wanted to run for office, you'd be like, oh, go find a majority minority district in your state and run there. And that was actually what they were told. And you see somebody like Lauren Underwood, who won in Illinois, who's 30 years old, she's a nurse, she talked about her personal experience with healthcare. She is amazing. And she won in a very heavily white district. Lucy McBath won in the, like I said, the not John Ossoff district, right? And so I know, you know, there were some big disappointments with people like Stacey Abrams, but like, let's be clear, Stacey Abrams got within this far in Georgia. That's a win, even though it's, you know, a really hard loss. So I do think like there are a lot of examples of people of color running in places where they got, I mean, Antonio Delgado, who I was trying to show you the ad of, he got like crazy racist ads ran against him in New York. Insane. He's wearing a hoodie, he's a rapper, all these crazy things. He won. You know, a lot of these folks that they went the most negative on, it just didn't work. So hopefully they'll learn that lesson. I don't think they will very quickly, but it did make me a little hopeful for America about, you know, where we go from here. I totally agree on leadership. It's interesting, Republicans actually are better at this because they have term limits on some of their leadership positions, and Democrats don't. But Nancy Pelosi's going to be the next speaker. I think there's no question about that. The question is she kind of like grooming for the next time some more folks? And there are a bunch of people that are running now for, you know, assistant leader and for the head of the DCCC and others that are really dynamic and fantastic, from like Hakeem Jeffries to Sherry Bustos, to, David Sicily, to, a lot of different folks have thrown their hat in the ring there. So I'm hopeful that will start to give them a platform, but it's tough if you're in the House, right? All these people that just want are like, I'm gonna protect your XYZ and I'm gonna do this, and it's like, really what you're gonna do is sit in the back of a committee hearing, like, and not get to ask a question until 3 hours in. So we need to make more opportunities for the kind of younger, newer folks that have now come in that have a lot to bring to the table.
Thanks for the great presentation. My question had to do with the 2 slides that we had. One showing that healthcare was a primary issue amongst voters, but then the subsequent slide talking about the cost of healthcare. I was wondering in your research, like, how much was that sort of driven by all this attention to drug pricing? Or if there was something else that was really driving that? Because I mean, this is a president that is, basically running on that issue, although he isn't really going to be really effective. I'm just curious about how much that has sort of driven those, that particular slide, the second one.
Yeah, we've done a bunch of qualitative on this, some focus groups and online research, and it's healthcare costs across the board. I mean, it's interesting when you talk to people, it's like the ACA never happened, and they just really don't feel like it's done much for reducing their healthcare costs. It's still just a huge portion of their paying for, the premiums. It's a huge portion of their take-home pay. So that is definitely a big piece of it. Drug pricing is also huge, and I think somebody who's smart in 2020 should be taking that on and having like a real effective policy proposal on that. Because clearly Donald Trump talks about it, but he doesn't do anything. It is a very potent issue, and I think it's one of those issues that can kind of reach across the geographical spectrum too, and appeal to a broader group of voters.
Thanks again for the great presentation. Ohio, I feel your pain, because in Alabama, we didn't even have a blue ripple. So, I see Doug Jones, who we were so excited to get elected, move more and more to the right as he's planning for 2020. But I'm pretty damn sure that Sessions is going to run for that old seat again, which will be another loss for us. But you said something that I'm having a hard time reconciling in my head. You talked about how the more centrist candidates did better, yet all of the energy around Beto O'Rourke and Andrew Gillum was so exciting, Stacey. So I guess in my head I'm trying to figure out, is that just because of the charm of those particular candidates? Because I think they had a lot of that. Or is there something else there?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think there were some really dynamic, fantastic young voices that people thought sounded new in a lot of places, and that excited folks kind of across the Democratic Party and independents alike. So I would suspect if you break down the ideology of the people that came out and voted for the first time for Beto O'Rourke, that they'd be pretty much across the spectrum. They weren't, his wasn't necessarily a super left democratic socialist wave. It was a, personality driven and no corporate path driven, and I'm going to be there for you. And he ran a very positive campaign actually. So I think he was able to kind of appeal across the spectrum. The folks that went full on, I'm going to basically take Bernie's presidential run and run it in the general, did very poorly. And I think there's now a question about where does that work? It works in certain places, maybe it doesn't work in all the places. But like Harry Eastman in Nebraska was kind of like one of the big examples. Dana Bolter in New York, Ben Jealous in Maryland were people that basically embraced the entire platform that Sanders had run on in 2016, and they just weren't able to get across the finish line.
They also didn't get a lot of support from the party, but it's interesting.
Use your microphone.
Two questions. One is, where did the anti-gerrymandering initiatives pass? That's awesome. And also, I think that people are only now starting to unpack that older voters broke even, which is enormous. That is every bit as giant as the massive sway of women and millennials. Like the older voters really actually tied, that hasn't happened, that's so huge, I don't even understand that, how did that happen?
Great question. I think there was